listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Welcome to the PBM Reform Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of pharmaceutical benefit management, cutting through the noise to uncover the truth. Since 2019, we've been your go-to source for the latest on how PBMs impact patient care, drug pricing, and the very future of pharmacy. Here, we champion the role of pharmacists, the most knowledgeable advocates for medication safety and expertise. Join us as we expose and generate discussions that are reshaping healthcare and explore how we build a better payment system which focuses on advancing pharmacy care.
Hey, Happy New Year from the Pharmacy Podcast Network. My name's Todd Urey, founder of the Pharmacy Podcast. This is the first episode of the year of the PBM Reform Podcast. And when I started the show way back in 2019, it was a slow-moving train. It was frustrating. Every single month or quarter or even year for that matter, I'm waiting for some kind of significance in PBM reform to take hold and take change because how frustrated I was for the community pharmacy owner, the long-term care pharmacy owner, even those combo shops that are out there. So this is a new year. 2025 is an impactful year. It's a powerful year. We're going to be talking about so many different things throughout the Pharmacy Podcast Network, but you are listening to the PBM Reform Podcast. And the collective power of this comes from people like Breck Rice. Happy New Year, Breck. It's great to see you.
Happy New Year, Todd.
All right, so this is an important episode. We are excited to be featuring Arizona Pharmacy Association, and you have a special guest. I'd like you to take over, Breck, and the show's all yours, and introduce our guest.
Yeah, no, appreciate it, Todd. And Happy New Year to all of our listeners. Again, the PBM Reform Podcast, our inaugural episode for the new year, 2025. And I've got to say this before we introduce Garet. It's been a while since I've been this excited about a new year for community pharmacy. I think there are so many amazing opportunities for community pharmacy today that we need to get the word out, and that's coming off of a pretty bleak couple of years. I've personally seen about 3,000 pharmacies close. These are all customers of mine at ServeRx that we've seen them either close their doors or sell their files for pennies on the dollar to a chain. And it has been bleak. But I've got to tell you, I'm super excited about 2025. There are so many positive opportunities and can't wait to share those with you. But I want to get into one of those opportunities, and that's continuing on the effort of reform. We know PBM reform is a very long process. Todd, you talked about how long it took you to just even get some traction with the podcast. And Todd is the pod father. He's been doing this way longer than anyone else. Everyone has a podcast now today. But Todd was doing it before it was even a popular thing, and then everybody jumped on that bandwagon. So, but excited about the opportunities to reform, continue that that process. We know it's a long process, but it is so vital. And so I'm excited to introduce to our guest today, Garet Turner, who has recently joined the Arizona Pharmacy Association. And we want to get a little background on you, Garet. How did you get started? What made you become an advocate and do advocacy work?
Yeah, well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me today. This is a wonderful opportunity. Just for the sake of the listeners, a couple of things that I want to point out. Number one, I'm not a pharmacist like some of the other state association execs. I am an association management professional. So you'll see behind my name CMP, which is Certified Meeting Professional, and CAE, which is Certified Association Executive. My background has been in the the nonprofit sector for the entirety of my career. I've worked with universities and research institutions and other types of nonprofits, and then broke into the association space, which is really what I focus on primarily at this point. The medical field is a fascinating area to me. And so one of the things that I thought about as I was looking for my next opportunity is where can I do the most good? And an organization like the Arizona Pharmacy Association offers an opportunity to make lasting change, and PBM reform is just one of those types of opportunities. So if you ask, why I'm interested, it's because I've been on the other side of this as both a patient myself or a caregiver to someone in need. If you ask why I'm passionate about this work as an association executive, it is because of exactly what you just talked about. We have many independent pharmacists who are our members that we want to support, and we want to, again, affect lasting change for them because of how many of them are being forced out. And that has repercussions not only for, the financial and other types of implications for them and their families, but it also has real lasting implications in a state like Arizona when we talk about healthcare deserts, no pun intended, right? But the fact of the matter is we've got lots of areas in the state of Arizona where the number one medical professional that someone is going to see is a pharmacist. And the idea that they would have to drive 40 or 50 miles to get to a primary care physician or an urgent care center that may be, overfilled as a result of any kind of urgent epidemic or anything of that nature is ludicrous. The need for individuals in those types of rural settings to have access to quality opportunities to manage their healthcare needs is so important. So, again, I'm interested in this not only because of having been a patient and a caregiver, but also because of our members and the patients that they serve.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point about our home state of Arizona. That, like a lot of the states, after we get out of Todd's neck of the woods, on the eastern side of the country, you get to the middle of the country and the western side. Let's take out the coastal, California and even Washington and Oregon, but all of the rest of that country, all the population is really in one or two spots, and so we see those areas like Phoenix and the metropolitan Phoenix area really being dominated by the chains. There's not a lot of independence in the Phoenix metro area, with the exception of specialty or compounding. So there still are compounders, but as soon as you get outside of the city limits, that's where all of our independent pharmacies reside. They're up in Safford and Snowflake and all these little tiny towns that still serve so many people, just in a far greater distance, right? So these are people who are in agriculture, or they're raising beef cattle, or they have dairy farms or whatever, and they're so vital to our economy. But man, for them to come all the way into Phoenix for services would be an hour to 2 hours or longer. So vital to have these, people on site that are trained and can help. And so many of our independent and rural pharmacies are much more than just a pharmacist. They're kind of a first aid, station as well, aren't they?
They absolutely are. And I know we're going to get into this later, and I won't belabor the point now, but I will say, the ability for our pharmacists and our technicians to work collaboratively with other medical professionals and, test and treat on the things that are appropriate is also vital for that very reason. So I'll leave that there for now, and we can get into that later. But, I do just want to mention that because of exactly what you said. These folks, depending on what the healthcare need is, an hour to 2 hours is just not a viable option. And the idea that some of these big box retailers would place a location there is also a little bit ludicrous, because we know that volume, right, is really part of their business model. And so the volume is not going to be there for them to really look into investing in these areas. So the idea that they would replace our independent pharmacies in some way, shape, or form, it just doesn't make sense. So at any rate, I'll let you guide us through some additional questions, but I'm glad you brought up that point.
Yep. Yeah. And that's, again, back to my earlier statement of why I'm so excited about 2025 is all of those opportunities for our pharmacies to get more involved in more clinical solutions. And now with, like you said, test and treat and some of the provider privileges that pharmacies have been granted, that can even be expanded even further. So some amazing opportunities out there. So Garet, tell me, how did you get connected with the Arizona Association? There's 50 associations out there. Why Arizona?
Well, Arizona had a need for a new chief executive officer. So some of the other states already have a CEO in place. But all said, I was looking for my next opportunity. At one point, I was serving as a number 2 for the Association of Air Medical Services. So think all things medevac, right? And again, the healthcare profession is one that I'm very interested in, even though I'm not a healthcare professional. My role is to help the individuals in these professions and industries do their jobs better. So when I saw this role open up, I used to do a decent amount of work in the Phoenix and Tucson area, and I always thought to myself, could live there. So when I saw this role open up, I thought more about the fact that I do love this area, and it would be a great opportunity. There are so many things that we can do to better serve our members from an educational standpoint, from an advocacy standpoint. And so that's really what made me decide to apply for this particular position. The rest was up to the board, of course, but I'm thankful to have them. We've got a great board, and I'm looking forward to engaging them and more of our volunteers to spearhead many of these things, including our Pharmacy Day at the Capitol, which this year will be April 2nd, so that we can take all of these important initiatives to the Capitol and talk with our state legislature about what to do next.
Yeah. Everyone can live here in Arizona this time of year, right? And we'll ask you that question in August.
See if you back still to have me in August.
Yeah, we'll see if you still have the same feeling about it. But no, I love it here. I absolutely love it. Our beautiful state is so diverse, right? Yep. We have snow-capped mountains, and we have the deserts, has been described earlier, but. So I know this is a fairly new role. You've only been here for a few months now, but I'm certain you already have some specific initiatives, PBM initiatives that you've discussed. And can you share any of those initiatives with our audience today?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is that this particular legislative session, which, by the way, starts today. So it's very apropos that we're doing this today. But we are not running a specific PBM bill for this particular session. Now, last session, Senator Shamp ran a bill that did not pass, and we plan to work with her and with her office to support the non-medical switching bill this session, so that hopefully it will pass, along with a few others. The particular bill that we are running is going to be around test and treat, which again goes back to the need for serving the underserved in this state and around those various rural areas. So even though we are not running a specific PBM reform bill at this time, a few that have been passed in Arizona are around prohibiting gag clauses on pharmacists, or pharmacies, I should say, limiting patient cost sharing, requiring PBM licensure and registration, and then also establishing a maximum allowable cost list. And so one of the things that eventually we will be reintroducing is working on what that minimum reimbursement amount is and so forth, so that we have a cost plus initiative that's out there.
Yeah, no,
because that's
excellent.
What's hurting our independent pharmacies for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely, and congratulations to Arizona. So Arizona and Florida were the first states to legislate and remove gag clauses. And if our listeners aren't fully aware of what that was, it was basically the PBMs would have language in their contract that they weren't allowed to tell the patient what their cash price was for the medication. And sometimes the copay for that medication was twice what the cash price would be if the patient just paid out of pocket. And so, yeah, congratulations. That was a huge victory. And then, it was passed through bipartisan legislation through the White House back in, I think, 2014, if I remember my history correct. So amazing benefit that everyone in all 50 states are now realizing that benefit of removing that gag clause. What do you think the biggest challenge is? You mentioned that you're working with a senator that bill that did not pass. What is the biggest challenge or roadblock for getting bills passed here in the state of Arizona?
I think that we've got quite a few retailers in this state that are very large, right? CVS plays a large role here. Walgreens plays a large role here. We know that all of these companies have large amounts of money as well. And so sometimes the largest roadblock here is actually the story that's being told, right? One of the things that I know we could go more into is what we are doing to share our story with the public. And right now, the answer to that is not enough. But sharing your story takes money. So part of the reason that we are not as able necessarily to get the community support and sometimes even the legislative support to move some of these things forward is the story that's being told most broadly is coming from the PBMs, not necessarily from people who are on the side of the patient. So I think that the only way we are going to be able to do our jobs more effectively is to tell our story more broadly. And that's something that I'm working on, from the opportunity to do kind of lunch and learns and other types of activities in, again, those rural areas, to talk about how the community members can get behind PBM reform. Right. So writing a letter to your senator or your representative and that sort of thing. We have a lobbyist and she's amazing and works with several other organizations who are also very interested in PBM reform, to include the Independent Pharmacy Coalition. Right. However, again, it takes more than just all of us who already understand why we need PBM reform. We've got to get out into the community and really help the average citizen that may or may not have read a lot about this understand why it matters to them and what can happen if we don't start to make changes now.
Yeah. And Garet, you bring up such a valid point, right? That a lot of the communication to legislators and communication to the public is being driven from the PBM side because they have millions and millions of dollars to spend on that. And one recent thing that passed here in the state of Arizona was driven completely by the PBMs, and that was to remove a benefit that doctors, that providers had since the beginning of time. You're not old enough, I'm sure, Garet, to remember Little House on the Prairie, but I grew up with Little House on the Prairie. And when Todd remembers that. And when they needed the doc to come out to treat somebody, he came and had his little bag with him, his little black bag, and that was his pharmacy back in the day. And so there were a lot of special situations where maybe an anesthesiology pain doctor was doing spine blocks on somebody that was in so much severe pain that they had to actually do a spine block. Well, then the last thing that patient wanted to do was go stand in line for at the pharmacy to get any additional medications or anti-inflammatories that were needed. And so they were dispensing it right directly from the doctor's office, point of care dispensing. Well, that was bypassing the PBMs. They couldn't get their greedy little hands on their cut of that because those doctors weren't in the PBM networks. Only pharmacies are. So they legislated for years to remove something that had been in this state and many states since the beginning of time, took away that ability for the doctor to dispense from their office because that was bypassing the PBM's greedy little hands. And so now it has to go to a retail pharmacy.
Yeah. And, there's still other rules around that even, right? That, again, the general public isn't going to understand. So I know that there are particular rules and laws around, what can be dispensed from an independent pharmacy versus what they try to force into a big box retail pharmacy, which a lot of people don't understand that the PBM, right? Because right now the PBM is part of a vertical. So there's the insurer, the PBM, and then in some cases, the big box retail pharmacy, right? All in the same vertical. So by forcing you to go to the pharmacy that's within their vertical, they are getting additional revenue, right? Which is what it's really about, not about your care. And so I think that, again, we've got to do a better job of telling that part of the story, because in some cases, some people would believe, well, maybe they're trying to get me to go to a CVS or to a Walgreens. And just for clarity, we do have members in our association that are with CVS or with Walgreens. I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that there's anything wrong with going to CVS or Walgreens, okay? I want to be clear about that. But again, for those people who need an independent pharmacy, sometimes when those medications are shifted to one of those other pharmacies that are part of an overall vertical, it would be very easy to believe, well, they've got more staff or they've got better access to, maybe the medication that I need or what have you. And in a lot of cases, that is just not the truth. It is about the revenue piece of it. And so, and I want to be clear that in many cases, going to a CVS or a Walgreens, and I only use them again because they are kind of front and center, or, around the entire country. But there are issues surrounding, staffing shortages and things of that nature. So it's not necessarily that you're going to receive better care by going to a larger institution. In some cases, you receive diminished care as a result of the volume that they have. So I think that, like I said, I just want to get back to the fact that we've got to do a better job of helping educate folks about what that looks like. And one of the things that's going to be coming up is around this PBM delinking and the legislation on that. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for education to the general public around that as well.
There are some absolutely phenomenal pharmacists, passionate pharmacists that work for CVS, that work for Walgreens, that work for Rite Aid. Nadia Ahmad, by the way, won the Pharmacy 50 most influential person in the industry. It was all voted by her peers, and she works for Walgreens. So when there's two sides of the big chains, there's the business side that's run by the corporate heads that have to be governed by the stockholder. And then there's the passionate techs and pharmacists that are the heart of those organizations. And when we talk about PBMs, and I'm talking out on LinkedIn constantly, I always want to say, listen, it's not the pharmacist, it's not the tech, it's not someone who's made their life. There are people that have made their careers working for CVS or Walgreens or even a mail order pharmacy. They've been there 20 years, 30 years. And these are wonderful people. That's not what we're saying. We're all three of us on this podcast, and everybody listening understands that there is a a very cold side of this business that is driving the importance of the stockholders' profit and the overall profit of the industry, that has crushed the meaning of what is healthcare, what is pharmacy care, what is a pharmacist, what is a pharmacy tech. So I always like to shout that out on the PBM Reform podcast, that we are not against these big organizations. Actually, we are for them. We just want the entity that's behind the scenes, that nobody understands what's going on, because it's the CVS pharmacist that gets screamed at by the patient, and everybody thinks it's the pharmacist that's standing there that it's their fault, and they have handcuffs on. They can't do anything about it. I just wanted to shout that out because I love pharmacists.
Oh, no.
No, I love that. And I want to point out two things, I think, to that. One is, we started out by even talking about the gag order piece, right? So when you say that, a pharmacist or a technician is standing there and getting screamed at, that's just it. There are things that they, in certain cases, weren't even allowed to say. And the importance of that is, it is not their fault, right? But they're not allowed to tell you it's not their fault either. And the people who are making those decisions don't ever have to stand in a pharmacy, right? It's no different than the people who decide to go to war sometimes have never been on a battlefield. So I just want to point that piece out. The other thing that I want to point out, you mentioned mail order pharmacies, and one of the other key reasons that PBM reform is really critical in the state of Arizona goes back to, yet again, something that we talked about at the beginning of this. You all mentioned that you'll come back to me in August and see how I feel about living on the sun here. But in all seriousness, the medical, the practicality of doing mail order for certain drugs in the state of Arizona just is not there, because we know that the viability of those, medication, or certain medications, I should say, requires very specific handling. And because of how hot it is outside, even your standard cooling packets and things of that nature just will not keep certain medications at the temperatures that are, required. But at the same time, certain PBMs require certain medications to only be filled through mail order, right? And this state just does not have the type of climate that allows for that during certain times of year. And I would also like to point out again that some of those PBMs are requiring you to have those things mail ordered through a piece of their vertical. So I just want to say the reason for PBM reform is not that all of the aspects of PBMs are terrible, but there are absolutely some pieces that are and have to evolve, because when PBMs very first came out, what they were intended for and how they're being used now are very different. And I think it's just really important that people who live in all states, but especially states where temperatures can affect the medication, understand the importance of the type of care they're receiving by being forced into mail order options.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. And those cooling packs only last so long, right?
Exactly. So if you are late coming home from work or something like that, your medication could be for naught by the time you get there.
So we use cool packs here in Arizona. Todd, do they use warming packs in Pennsylvania during the winter out there?
This time of year, I don't think so. I don't think there are any warming packs, but I woke up to 5 degrees this morning, so they better have warming packs.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you mentioned earlier, Garet, that about delinking. For those that may not be familiar with that, give us more background.
So it's not a done deal yet, but I mean, essentially, there are some things that are out there about essentially decoupling the PBMs from any vertical that also owns a pharmacy, right? So it would cause the PBM to truly be a third party. Now, what that looks like in the end, I don't know. There are people that are far smarter than me that could answer that question. But the gist of it is that a PBM would be decoupled from the types of verticals that I was just describing. so that they would remain a third party. One would like to believe that it would be a neutral third party, but because of how long they've been part of those verticals, the question becomes, will this really solve the problem, or will it just be for show? I think that part remains to be seen, but again, it would at least be a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Has there been any discussion around unbundling the networks also? Because you've got these big PBMs that are buying up smaller PBMs and then bundling them all in. And it may not be in the best interest of the pharmacy. So it may be only in the best interest in 99.9999999% of the time it's in the interest of the PBM, that why they've done that. But example, maybe the patient has a great relationship with a local, they're a part of a local employer group that pharmacy has a great relationship with, and they already have their own, relationship on dispensing medication to that employer group. But a PBM is forcing them into a network that they really don't need to be a part of. But if they want to be in network, if they want all of the managed care, they have to sign those contracts. So is there any delinking of those contracts so that pharmacies can actually choose which networks they want to participate in?
So I do not have direct knowledge of that. There could be. That's something that I'll have to, I tell you what, I'll follow up with two of our lobbyists and our Legislative Affairs Committee co-chairs, and I will get back to you so that you can at least post that in the comments afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I selfishly can tell you from the standpoint of processing workers' compensation claims that it's not in the best interest of our community pharmacies to be in every work comp network. But yet the big PBMs bundle those networks because they know they can drop the reimbursement down to a managed care fee of, $3 or $4 when the pharmacy really should be earning $50, $60, $100 on that script. So yeah, you can see where I'm going with that it's obviously very financially rewarding to the PBM to bundle those networks, but not for the pharmacy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we know how much, time and money it takes to get reform accomplished and get the communications out there. Are there any ways of partnering with coalitions or associations to help also with that communication and the financial side of getting the word out?
Absolutely. So we've got a PAC. We also, have an advocacy fund. Our advocacy fund would help not only offset the cost of the lobbyists, but also, allow for investment in more activities, including marketing and events to get the word out there. Again, I bring up that the fact that there is an independent pharmacy coalition here in the state of Arizona, and would be happy to connect you with not only our lobbyists, but the folks that are running that particular coalition. We are working to partner with them as well as figure out ways to support, again, those legislators that are working to reform PBMs. So if you're in this state, reaching out to us is kind of step one, and sharing any ways that you are interested in getting involved is step two. And then we can make appropriate introductions and kind of go from there. We are definitely keen to work with any of the national organizations that are working on PBM reform. I know APHA has some things going on. And so I just had a meeting last week with the state affairs or state government affairs person at APHA, and I'm looking forward to finding more ways to partner with them and be in support, whether it be going to DC and testifying or being present. We are also looking for more stories because, again, part of this is we can't just share data. I think that some people need to hear the actual stories of how it's affected individuals to better understand what's really going on. Statistics are sterile. but stories are personal, and that's the part that's going to, I hope, change the minds of some individuals. One of the things that I did last week was go to this lunch and learn that had, again, some state legislators at it. And, I got to sit at a table that had quite a few individuals who were very focused on this particular issue. And what was great was that at that lunch, it was more than just the independent pharmacy coalition members who did a presentation. We had patient advocates. So we had a woman that had MS stand up and share her story about how PBMs had affected her and the types of denials that she had received regarding medication that caused her to end up in the hospital. We had another patient advocate, but also a volunteer leader from the American Diabetes Association. And she talked about, again, being forced into the mail order, types of procedures that we talked about a little bit earlier. And that's a really critical one, because as anyone who is diabetic knows, insulin has to be stored at a very specific, temperature. And so, again, going back to Arizona having a wild climate, we want to make sure that those people are receiving drugs that have been stored at the proper temperatures and are still viable for their use. We also had 2 doctors stand up and share their stories. And I want to bring up the doctors because I think that a lot of people hear PBM, and because it's a pharmacy benefit manager, people think that it only affects pharmacists. But doctors prescribing drugs, know which drugs work best with their patients most often. It does not mean that they can't receive feedback from a pharmacist or what have you, but because the doctors are the ones prescribing the medications, oftentimes they are in battle even with PBMs about whether to have someone on the name brand drug or a biosimilar or what have you. And what a lot of people don't realize is, yes, it being on a biosimilar, allows you to receive the overall general effect, but you could have the symptoms or the side effects from a biosimilar that you did not have on the name drug, Or in some cases, it could be vice versa. Sometimes the name drug doesn't work for people. And if they were on a biosimilar, but because the PBM has decided that no, they need to be forced onto the name drug, then they could end up with side effects from that as well. So at the end of the day, this is not just about whether or not these individuals are doing things that are harming, the independent pharmacies and so forth. They are harming patients and making the day-to-day lives of everyday Americans very challenging if you have some sort of medical condition. So
great point. Yeah, absolutely. Great point.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Breck, I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to share the other reason why I really loved the doctors being at that lunch and sharing their stories is they talked about the number of hours that they actually have to spend outside of patient care doing the back and forth emails and secondary reviews and all of those types of things with PBMs to appeal, the use of certain drugs on their patients. And so if we're going to, look at this purely as a business decision, then okay, fine. Let's talk about the amount of money spent or lost, depending on which side of this you're on. Going back and forth about something that should be a no-brainer because this entire system was created to be a caring system, healthcare. So these individuals that have dedicated their lives to provide care for our citizens are now forced into a situation of bureaucracy and paperwork that is taking away from their ability to provide that care. So,
yeah, excellent point. Does your association collaborate with any other state associations? How would you bring more power to a bill if it was being worked on in multiple states?
Yeah, at this moment, because I'm so new, I'm not aware of any other states that we partner with, but I will tell you, being part of the National Alliance of State Pharmacy Associations, so NASPA, is a great thing. I learn a lot from my colleagues, and we actually just left our retreat recently to learn more about what every state is doing and share some ideas about how to advance various things. Now, because every state as is at different stages on certain parts of PBM reform, right? We would need to find someone who we could partner with and that our goals align with, and a state that also probably has a very similar mix of you know or a similar population, I guess I'll say, as the state of Arizona. But I do think that you're right. There are probably ways for us to advance two states at a time when we are able to connect and drive certain issues forward. And it would be, again, a win-win for both state legislatures.
Yeah, I believe so. What about strategies for getting more support with our lawmakers at the state level? Is there ongoing outreach to bring more senators into the fold of hey, we need to do something with PBM reform?
Yes, and there's a great interest, at least in Arizona, to look at this and really evaluate what's best for our citizens. So I commend the legislators here in Arizona for the work that they've already done, their interest in doing more. And I think that, again, at least here in Arizona, our lobbyists and some of these other coalitions will continue to do the types of education of our healthcare committee, along with other legislators, to ensure that they can vote appropriately by being fully educated on the effects, not only to, again, the patients, but also to the small businesses, which is a very key piece of this when we look at what happens with these independent pharmacies that are pushed out. So,
yeah, that's excellent. Is there anything else that is an initiative that's important to you that we haven't gotten to or touched on at this time that you'd like to share?
Well, I just think that this test and treat bill that we're putting forward, the nice part is we've collaborated with the Physicians Association. We've also collaborated with the Retail Association. And we're very excited about putting this forward. I know that there are a lot of members of AZPA that are probably worried about, hey, us having test and treat actually means one more thing to do, right? And I hear you, and I want you to know that one of the other things that we'll be taking a look at is what we can do to lobby for better conditions for anyone who's struggling with how much is being put on them, to do in a day. But the fact of the matter is, test and treat is so important, not only for our independent pharmacies, but again, for those patients that are in those rural areas, without the pharmacist's ability to do, certain tests and to treat certain illnesses, those individuals either, one, go without the care, or two, have to drive so far that it's sometimes very difficult for them and becomes more of a burden than it needs to be. So,
yeah.
Like I said, I just want to point out we really are focused on that this year. I'm hopeful for a very successful outcome. I'm thankful again, not only to our legislative co-chairs, but also to our lobbyists for the work that they are doing behind the scenes to lead this particular effort. And like I said, I know that there are pharmacists or technicians that will listen to this podcast and say, yeah, but we work in a retail setting and we're going to be forced to do more. And I hear you. We can work together on how to improve working conditions, but this is still important for, again, those members of the community that wouldn't otherwise receive that care.
Yeah, and it's a financial opportunity for the community
For
pharmacy as well.
bingo. Yeah,
Yep.
I just want to share one thing. That's a great point regarding a financial opportunity. While I was at that lunch last week, one of the people leading the Independent Pharmacy Coalition, and I want you to know I've not used names mainly because I didn't request permission to use their name, so I don't want to go out mentioning who said what, right? But one of the individuals did stand up and present the fact that, she's losing $17,000 a month, right? Because of the reimbursement rates from PBMs on certain drugs. So, the example was, I sell you a drug for $1,000, but I only get reimbursed $900, right?
Yep.
And so, or the other way around, but you know where I'm going with this. But the point being, she's losing $17,000 a month. And the only reason she's been able to make it up is because of some additional activities that she's able to conduct in her pharmacy. But this just is not sustainable for our folks. And so it's really important that we find a way to offer them some additional revenue streams in order to bolster their financial viability.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen a study recently that showed about 1/4 of all the medications now dispensed at a retail pharmacy are dispensed below the acquisition cost of the drug.
There you go.
They're losing money. Yeah.
Yep.
On all those. So something has to change, something has to give. And also on that lines of the test and treat and those opportunities that are financially beneficial to community pharmacies, CMS just extended their incident to billing available for pharmacies too as well, in having collaborations with local medical doctors to pick up some of the services, maybe some of the screenings like diabetes screenings or heart health screenings that aren't getting done because we also have a shortage of primary care providers as well.
Bingo. Yep.
Yeah, some great opportunities out there. Well, everyone, you have been listening to the PBM Reform podcast here on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Our guest today is the new cheese in charge at the Arizona Pharmacy Association, Garet Turner. It's been so great to get to know you better, Garet. And one last, anything else that you want to share with the listeners today?
No, I just want to thank you guys for having me on. And I just want to say, I mean, for anybody who's watching this, I'm super jealous of Todd's background, and I fully intend to build that out at my office very soon. But if you're not watching, I highly suggest you find the video and you check out his background there at some point.
True professional. You need to see his whole studio. His studio is amazing. So you probably have other camera angles you could zoom out and show us. But hey, it's always great to be with you too as well, Todd. Again, the Podfather, or the Todd Father, as some people refer to him, of podcasting here on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. There we go. There's a good studio shot.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he'll have guests in, and they'll literally have mics and everything set up at 3 different corners of the studio. It's a great layout. So
cool.
Any last words from you, Todd?
I'm just excited that we got to talk with Garet. I want to congratulate you for taking the lead role at the Arizona Pharmacy Association, and just a shout out to all of the Arizona pharmacists and pharmacy technicians. We are in your corner. This entire publication, this entire network is about your success. If there's anything that we can ever do for you, please reach out to our organization just by going to pharmacypodcast.com. Go to our contact section. If you have ideas for podcasts, we have over 42 podcast hosts that have themes of just about anything in pharmacy that we'd love to connect you into. Please subscribe on all platforms, podcast platforms. Pick out your favorite and share this podcast with a fellow Arizonian. Is that what it is? Arizonians?
I think so.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
Yeah.
Listening.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Hey, thanks again, Garet. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate you.